The Minister for Veteran Affairs.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I do take great pleasure in joining the debate on the future Drought Fund Bill and recognise from the outset the work by the Minister in bringing together the Coalition Government's focus on making sure that our farmers and our communities are well prepared for the inevitability of future droughts in our country. I'll be making a few comments in a moment's time, Deputy Speaker, about the existing drought which is impacting on Gippsland farmers. But for now, I want to reflect on the fact that this legislation, the Future Drought Fund, will provide for a long-term investment to build drought resilience in Australian communities, which is desperately needed, and to enable our $60 billion industry to reach new heights through improved performance. And the Future Drought Fund will provide additional support for our farming families and our communities, with the aim of bolstering drought resilience right across our nation. Importantly, Deputy Speaker, the fund will be available to support research, development and innovation, key areas for our farming families as they adapt to the variability of the climate, and making sure we continue to play an important role in meeting the food and fibre needs not just of our own community but obviously to our export markets. It also provides help to deliver some infrastructure projects, promote the adoption of technology and support improved environmental and natural resource management to encourage sustainable agricultural practices. And I want to reflect just for a moment on that point, Deputy Speaker. Our farmers are at the absolute front line when it comes to practical environmental management. It's our farmers who tend to be the ones who join the land care organisations who, with the backing of good technical support, are prepared to invest in their own properties to make sure they're more viable in the longer term. I need to reflect on the McAllister Irrigation District in my seat, where with the benefit of whole-of-farm management plans, our farming families have now been investing in improved irrigation technology to make sure that they reduce the amount of nutrient running off their properties and into the nearby streams and down onto the Gippsland lakes, which obviously has an impact on the potential for algal blooms. Obviously, the farmers themselves don't want to see those nutrients running off their property because they want to get them back on the grass and growing more pasture for their dairy herds. And the investments we've seen in Gippsland over the past 10 years, backed up by good research, has been incredibly important to achieve good outcomes for my farming communities. I want to point out, Deputy Speaker, that one of the key aspects of this legislation for the House, it will provide for a drawdown of $100 million per year to invest in important drought resilience projects. And I'm hopeful this legislation gets through as quickly as possible, because I've got a few projects in my own electorate which I'm sure people will be coming forward to co-invest with government on projects that will make a real difference. And I want to refer specifically to the Lindenow Flats, which is on the banks of the Mitchell River. And the farmers on the Lindenow Flats are incredibly important in terms of providing the salad and vegetable needs along the whole east coast of Australia. But every summer they're severely impacted by their capacity to draw down on their entitlements, so they actually paid for these entitlements from the Mitchell River. They're having to come up with a whole range of their own solutions in terms of storing water throughout the heavier flows in winter, and then having the access to that water in the summer months to finish their crops off. We're going to need to find ways to help those farmers deal with the variability of the flows on the Mitchell River. These farmers are coming to me saying they're not after a greater entitlement, they simply want to actually get the entitlement that they've actually paid for, which is very difficult to achieve in these current dry conditions. And I can't stand here this evening, Deputy Speaker, and talk on this bill without reflecting for some time on the drought, which is impacting on many families in my community. And I've got to say, Deputy Speaker, and I know you've been here a few years now yourself, when you see your community struggling, and it's often in a rural and regional seat or peri-urban seat, your community may struggle for a range of reasons. In Gippsland, it's all the natural disasters you'd expect. We're exposed to fire and flood and drought, and I've had all those in the 10 years I've been in this place. But I have to say, Deputy Speaker, of all those, I find drought the most exhausting and insidious of natural disasters. It erodes at the hope of the farming community. It undermines the viability of our agribusinesses, and it's every sunny day, every windy day, every dry day is corrosive throughout the community as it takes away from people's confidence in the future. Droughts are times of decisions, Deputy Speaker, decisions around when to sell, which of your stock to keep, how you're going to purchase feed, where you're going to access that feed from, and then other decisions around when you re-sow pastures, taking a punt, I guess, on the seasonal break, which has to come hopefully this autumn. I've got to say, Deputy Speaker, there's many in my community who feel like our drought, the Gippsland drought, has been the forgotten drought, which is not meant to be derogatory to anyone in this place or derogatory to the broader community. We know that Western Queensland in particular has suffered enormously, and large parts of New South Wales have been gripped by drought for a long period of time now. And Gippsland is renowned as a place of rolling green hills and fast-flowing rivers, and people just seem to expect that it's always like that in Gippsland. Well, the farmers I've been talking to over the summer break, Deputy Speaker, are telling me that in some places, in some parts of my region, it is the worst conditions in 100 years. People who've been on the same property for 100 years, have rainfall records their families have kept reliably, tell me they're experiencing their worst conditions in 100 years. I've got to say to the people of Gippsland, we haven't forgotten them in this place, and I certainly haven't forgotten them, and we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support them as much as possible to ensure they're viable in the longer term. I had the opportunity just a couple of weeks ago to catch up with a few of my old mates in the agricultural industry, and in tow I had the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Infrastructure and Transport, and my good friend Michael McCormack. And as we met with farmers and travelled through the area south of Sale, around the area of Gifford and McLaughlin's Beach, he was able to see for himself just how poorly the country was doing in that part of my region. In the 2 weeks since, though, conditions there, which were already very bad, have deteriorated enormously. Some windstorms have resulted in paddocks blowing badly, and farmers are just watching some of their prized asset, their topsoil, blowing away before their eyes. There is a sense of helplessness in the face of these dry conditions, a sense of frustration as well, as they recognise the very severe economic consequences for their own financial situation, the environmental consequences for their properties, and these are well-managed properties, Deputy Speaker, so the environmental consequences are quite severe. But it also has a huge social impact on the structure of little communities like Gifford and Stradbroke and McLaughlin's Beach, and then as you go further east through my electorate, areas around the townships of Bryagalong, through Bengwarden and Merloo, all the way up to Orbost, which is famous for its Snow River flats and being very productive country, all in very poor condition, and then into the high country through say Swifts Creek, and then up to Dargo and that region as well. So it's dry across a very large section of the East Gippsland and Wellington Shires, and I have to acknowledge that the government did include both those shires in its support for local government. So it's basically affecting just about all the dryland country in my community, and as I said, some are reporting the worst conditions for nearly a century, and parts of East Gippsland have received their lowest rainfall on record. And at the same time, the farmers on the irrigated land are preparing for water shortages as well. Unfortunately, the most recent Bureau of Meteorology drought statements from February this year showing a 22-month rainfall deficiency. Serious or severe rainfall deficiencies are continuing across much of eastern Victoria, and again the January rainfall in Gippsland was below average. It's a crisis situation, Deputy Speaker, which, as I said just a moment ago, has deteriorated in the last couple of weeks. We do need to see all levels of government working together in these very challenging times, and I commend the work that I've already seen by the federal government, but I've got to say I'm looking for more in terms of local and state coordination of our efforts to respond to this crisis. In the order of 380 farmers across the Gippsland region are receiving the farm household allowance, in 260 of those are in the East Gippsland area alone. And I know measures have been taken to try and improve the eligibility criteria to try and reduce red tape, but the feedback I'm receiving on the ground is that there's still more work to be done in that regard. It is still extraordinarily difficult, time-consuming and frustrating for our farming families to access that household allowance. It's an important payment, though, because it does help to put food on the table. While it's a modest payment, it's certainly something that those who are eligible greatly appreciate. There has been 2 special lump sum payments for the eligible families. One was paid last September, and I think in April this year there'll be another payment which will be made available. I think it's in the order of $12,000 for couples and $7,200 for singles. Again, important payments for those who are eligible for them. The concern that's been raised with me is that if a farming family takes the initiative and starts securing off-farm income, it then becomes very difficult to actually access some of the support that we're making available to them. So we're effectively punishing people who have the capacity and the wherewithal and the get up and go to go out and try and keep their farm viable by seeking off-farm income. It's something that I've raised with the Minister and the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister in the past, and will continue to do so in the future. I have been frustrated in the early stages by the Victorian Government's lack of action on the drought, but I spoke with their State Agriculture Minister over the weekend and received assurances that she'll be visiting the drought-impacted area of my community in the coming days. Victoria is yet to announce that it will sign up to the $50 million on-farm emergency water infrastructure rebate scheme, and that is frustrating for some of the farmers in my community who see the benefits flowing to their New South Wales colleagues across the border and are waiting for Victoria to actually sign up for the scheme. There's a lot of demand within my community for the Victorian Government to take action in relation to municipal rates. The biggest challenge that farmers have as they deal with this drought is, as I said before, making these important decisions, but their basic cost structure of their business is making it hard for them to make sure they're viable for when the better conditions return. So help with municipal rates is something that just about every farmer I've spoken to over the last couple of months has raised with me. They want to see more assistance with other basic household costs, some of the fixed costs around the registration of vehicles, and also they want to see whether there's more we could be doing to provide the technical support and perhaps even financial support to help them re-establish pastures which are blowing away at the moment. So these are farms that have been sustainably and very well managed for generations, and they're seeing conditions and experiencing challenges that they've never dealt with before, and some will require the additional technical support and agronomists and other specialised advice on how they re-establish these pastures when the better conditions return. We need to make sure that these farming businesses, which have been viable for decades, remain viable in the future. The federal government itself deserves some credit, I think, Deputy Speaker, for what's already been invested in terms of working with the drought-affected communities across our nation. The Drought Communities program has been extended from, I think, 60 local communities to 81, providing them with $1 million each to keep people employed and try to help businesses keep running. I doubt that that's going to be enough, Deputy Speaker. The $1 million will go very quickly. I know in the Wellington Shire right now, one of the decisions they made was to subsidise the water cartage costs just for people to fill their tanks for domestic use. I think that money is going to run out fairly quickly across many municipalities, so I doubt that it's going to be enough, and we'll probably have to revisit that issue in the weeks and months ahead if conditions don't improve. As mentioned before, the on-farm emergency water infrastructure rebate scheme, which has been well received, I understand, in New South Wales, but to the best of my knowledge, Victoria hasn't signed up at this point. There's been increased funding for mental health, which is very important and something that reflects on the way this place and our community has learned a great deal about the impact of trauma on the mental well-being of our communities, and have that additional resources available. I think it's very important. I would simply encourage on that point, Deputy Speaker, that our farming communities, but also people in the towns who may not be aware of how tough it is out on the farms, that they reach out to their mates on the land and make sure they're not trying to go through this alone. In terms of my own actions, Deputy Speaker, obviously as a local member, I've raised my concerns directly with the Prime Minister both late last year and again this year, and I've been seeking a whole-of-government approach to help our farming communities. As I said, the Deputy Prime Minister has already visited my region, and the Agriculture Minister will be there in a couple of weeks' time. My message, I guess, to put it simply, Deputy Speaker, is while we have done a lot, and we can be proud of what we've done in this place, and the government and the cabinet can be proud of what we've done already, I'm afraid there's still a lot more to be done, and I'm afraid that the support is not necessarily getting out there to all of the families who need it, and the bureaucracy and the red tape we put in the road of people when they're already in difficult circumstances undermines the value of the funding that's been already announced. We've got to find ways to cut through the red tape. I face it in my own department in the Veterans Affairs area on a daily basis. When people are at their most vulnerable, when they're struggling with this economic and social challenges that go with drought, they're not in the best place to be filling out piles of paperwork. So my message to my farming families is to look after each other in these difficult times, look after themselves and make sure they're seeking any assistance if they need it and getting out and about as much as they possibly can. We do have a great history of providing food and fibre for our nation in Gippsland, but we also have a great future in the agricultural sector.